When was the last time you listened to the words of the Declaration of Independence? Was it when you watched Hamilton? When you were in elementary school? I was watching a YouTube video about a week ago, and it struck me how some sections from the preamble sounded uncannily like they were written for our present situation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure those rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of those ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to effect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. I probably heard these words in public school at some point, but this time around, I find them so much more powerful than when I was a kid. There are many contradictions between the ideals written in the Declaration of Independence and the actual country that our founding fathers built. However, something that I believe is proof of an alignment is how they built into our systems methods for us to reshape them ourselves. That takes insight and trust in posterity, and for that I am thankful. That brings me to the purpose of this video. In the previous videos, I've explained various systems that make up the governing of the United States. I've also highlighted various problem points and issues where I truly believe that our systems are not currently representing us as well as they could be. Now, this video is called the Representation Solution, and with an ambitious title like that, I'll need to cover, well, a lot. Thankfully, I cheated because I made this the final episode in a series. So, if you haven't watched the previous episodes, I encourage you to start from the beginning. We've laid out the groundwork there so we can put the pieces together in this video. So, to compensate for my cheating, I'll reward you with not one, but four solutions. But really, that's just me cheating again, because what I'm really doing is explaining three different solutions people have tried in the past that have had various levels of success, and combining them all into a novel solution at the end. Without further ado, Solution A. Convince your representatives to change the system. This solution obviously would work, since all it technically takes to change our system of our federal government are votes by Congress members. There is value in, say, calling your representative and urging them to take action. But as explained in episode 2, federal Congress members have many different interests affecting how they vote on what laws to pass, from other members in their party's leadership, other members that aren't in their party, especially if their own party does not have a majority, etc. Even if you could cast a magic spell on your representative to vote on what you want, that only covers 3 representatives, 2 senators, and 1 representative from the House. This idea is just too narrow and vague for it to hold much merit by itself. Of course, if our politicians work together, they could solve the problem where they don't work together. It's not really a solution. Instead, this would be better thought of as a goal. So here are some pros and cons. Some pros. You can easily access contact information for your representatives. Even if a representative doesn't read or listen to your message, it's relatively easy to reach your neighbors and others that live in your area to work together to send lots of messages so that the idea you're trying to transmit has a bigger impact. Now, some cons. The only politicians that have much of a reason to listen to you are 2 senators and the 1 representative in your district. These 3 politicians are able to introduce legislation, but that legislation needs a lot more than just those votes in order to be enacted. Another thing is, it's very hard to have access to mediums, audiences, vocabulary, or even the legal and political expertise to advocate a bill that is both effective and would be well received across the whole nation. Another con is, once you've done it, there isn't really anywhere to go from there. Either you've convinced them or you haven't. The best you could do is convince other people who live somewhere else to convince their representatives, which quickly becomes more and more difficult. Now let's move on to solution B. If you're dissatisfied with the system, then join the political party that you align most with and put every effort into pushing that party to encourage legislation to improve our systems. This idea has some strengths because it utilizes existing systems, such as a large nation-spanning political party that has millions of current members. It also uses vocabulary that everyone is familiar with. For example, I believe Democrats can solve this problem if they rally behind famous Democrat congressmember who introduced a specific bill. However, it comes with some pretty difficult weaknesses too. There's a lot of external baggage. No matter how popular your ideas are, the fact that these ideas would become part of one side's platform would mean that the other side would likely feel pressure to find flaws and work against your ideas simply because your party is the party they compete against. Also, each party has a history of their own policies and goals. In other words, internal baggage. There are many ways to improve representation in the US, but some methods wouldn't line up with one party's ideas as well as another's. Some solutions wouldn't line up with either party's ideals. The existing parties have their own historical suit that keeps its members from considering certain solutions. For example, Reagan has shaped a lot of the conservative platform and ideas from the past 30 years, including the idea that
in this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
it wouldn't be a great look if his party at the time then advocated solutions that the federal government could implement in order to increase representation. Both parties have a history of collecting more power in the executive branch and keeping it there, rather than returning it to Congress. So, going with this solution would probably alienate nearly half of the country from the beginning. Secondly, it could get hampered by its own history by handcuffing itself to only considering solutions that would align with its other platform concerns. Now let's move on to solution C. Start another party. This has been done in the past, even with humongous support. When it was its most successful, this idea did have huge impacts on the political scene of its time, but it did not change the two-party structure. During Teddy Roosevelt's first term, he was asked if he would run for a second term. He said no. He came to regret that and later decided to run for a second term. Despite his extremely high popular support, he was denied the opportunity to be nominated by his previous party, so he created his own, the Bull Moose Party. This proceeded to split the vote between himself and his successor, and the other party won in a landslide. Now, you could try to say that another political party might be able to gain more support if it voluntarily committed itself to never running a candidate for president. After all, that's the main reason we have a two-party system. However, even if this were the case, it would still be seen as a competing force to the Democrat and Republican parties. There would be an uphill fight from the beginning to try to gain supporters. From the bottom, it would require people to give up membership in the party that they have affiliated with. Many people have spent tons of effort getting to know their representatives or Congress members or the politicians in their state governments, and many of the politicians in both federal and state governments have affiliations with one of the two existing parties. If our goal is to improve the systems of our government, it would be a bad idea to alienate the people already pushing the levers and buttons in that system. Besides, it's those people running the systems that vote on laws that could change them. There is a pro. There's no baggage if you've created a new party from scratch. However, every single political structure would need to be organized and created. That means creating a new state party for every state, creating the organizational structures, gathering funding, figuring out branding, and deciding upon platform planks, organizing rallies, and more. New vocabulary would have to be created in order to get its messages out, which is extremely difficult to catch on. Publicity of any sort would be very difficult. In its early days, existing media would be able to portray the party however it wanted without the party being able to have much of a voice itself until it made its own media. That could take years, and even if it was successful, very few people would be incentivized to watch or listen to that media unless they were part of the few that were members of that party. It would not be able to have any real chance at getting a politician to become president. If it did, our first past the post system would mean a three-way split would basically cause a constitutional crisis. This isn't the proper way to do it. Basically, our systems are set up in a way that makes third parties on the federal level so non-functional that the sane people would never be convinced to let it happen. And if it somehow happened that way, the other parties would not be happy about it. This system just ain't big enough for three of us. With all that bad news, I have a bit of good news. We can take most of the good things out of these ideas and leave out large swaths of the bad things. So here goes. As I've explained in the first video, The most far-reaching political problem in the United States is poor representation. The two-party system requires people to group themselves in such a way that doesn't line up very well with the real world. When you actually get down and dirty in the weeds of most political problems, you'll find that they're usually too complex to narrow them down to just two sides. Therefore, the solution is to increase representation so that more than just two sides are able to be talked about and identified with. That sounds great and all, but I didn't lead you all this way to just say something bad needs to be made good and then leave it at that. If representation is going to be improved, I believe there are many details that we would want to hold on to in order to create a system to solve this problem effectively. Let's work backwards from the three solutions I mentioned and pick the good parts and throw out the bad. If we were going to form a new party, it'd come with a lot of struggles. But we really need to form a group of some kind if we're going to be able to work together. Therefore, we can form a group, but it's not going to be a political party. Solution B was to join and try to modify one of the two existing parties. Now, there are already lots of people in those parties trying to do that, with varying degrees of success. This solution's already going to be attempted, whether we think it's a good solution or not. Unless you're already doing this, let's drop this idea as a whole, but pick out the good parts. The best way to do that is, since we're not forming a third political party anyway, let's make our group non-exclusive. If someone wants to join and they consider themselves a Republican, not a problem. If they want to join and they consider themselves a Democrat, sounds good. We'll make our group a great place where people who consider themselves a Democrat or Republican can interact with one another favorably. We'll also make plenty of room for people who are politically disillusioned, who don't feel a particular affinity towards either party, but still want to make a difference. Lastly, we come back to solution A. Convince our existing representatives to make changes to our systems. This is truly where the decisions get made. If we think there's some problems within our government, then that means we'll need to come up with ideas that we can share with our representatives, as well as the organization, to be able to communicate them in huge quantities so that our voices can't be ignored. This solution is one we'll be able to utilize eventually, once we've gathered enough people to our cause. What could this solution look like practically? Well, it's going to take a while. What I'm proposing is the creation of a pan-partisan organization. The long-term mission of this organization is to focus on improving our systems so that 1. Representation can be improved for all U.S. citizens, and 2. There can be discussion and creation of ways to empower our government to be able to solve the big issues that require partisan cooperation. Think things like the national debt, or the military-industrial complex, or artificial intelligence. This is the purpose of the United Framers of America. The people who can get involved are welcome to keep their party affiliation and their stances on political issues. However, the focuses of the UFA will not be to decide on those issues, but to ensure proper representation of them is possible. If enough people join and this group gets large enough, we'll be able to start doing a lot more than making YouTube videos. Eventually, I'd like to have things like economic forums where people can tackle complex things like the national debt, or constitutional conventions where we can examine how we can fix some things that everyone agrees is a problem, but no one feels comfortable focusing on because it's technical and not very easy to put into a soundbite. The original framers of the Constitution and the founders who created our nation largely held the belief that those with poor representation should create their own. It may feel like our country is more divided than ever, but we already have tools that, if we work together, we can use to reshape our systems. We will focus on forming a broad coalition of people who are willing to work together and organize ourselves in such a way that allows us to get in the weeds and fix some problems. As we succeed in small things, we will gain traction to be able to conquer bigger problems. And that's the gist. We organize to increase our representation, and eventually we make our voices so lasting and loud and valuable that our politicians will have to respond. And even though it sometimes feels like our politicians aren't listening, if you watch poll numbers for long enough, you'll see that politicians really do respond to popular opinion. That's because if they don't get to stay in office. That's the power of term limits, which is a great system that lets us hold our representatives accountable. It's really hard for me to leave it at that because I want to rush forward and explain all of my ideas for things like branding, vocabulary, organizational structures, and talk about steps we can take to actually get things in motion. But I decided that if we're going to pull this off, we'll need to have patience and determination. We can't change everything overnight. In fact, this is going to be a very long road. I can't change these things by myself. I only have control over myself. Therefore, I can keep in mind that I can choose to be patient, and I am determined. I can give space to my audience for them to develop and utilize those skills too. I promise it pays off in the end. Peace.